Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to talk about Chapter 10 in our textbook, which is called the Muscular System. This is the first of a two-chapter set that go together. Chapter 10, the Muscular System, and then Chapter 11, Muscular Tissue. Okay, now Chapter 10 is quite long and quite involved. This, to be absolutely honest, belongs better in a medical school textbook or a physician's assistant or nurse's textbook, but it's here in ours. This shows every single one of the 300 or so muscles that are present in our body. No, you do not have to learn the names of every single one. Again, I hope that you go through the lists, go through the pictures or the sketches, and learn the names of the most important muscles, the ones that hold our body upright, the ones in our abdomen and in our chest, the ones that move our arms or our legs. I'll say I do not make up the tests, so I do not know what's going to be on the test. Don't ask me ahead of time. All right. Now, previously in the chapter on tissue, we talked about the three types of muscle tissue that are present in the human body. Skeletal muscle, which is a voluntary muscle, cardiac muscle found only in the heart, and smooth muscle, which is found mostly in and around the organs on the inside. This chapter will almost exclusively discuss the skeletal muscles. First, let's look at some general information. What are the functions of muscles? First is movement. When a muscle contracts, it shortens and something moves. Second is for stability. There are muscles that are able to keep us standing up straight, muscles that keep our legs straight, our abdomen firm. These are for stability. Thirdly, there are muscles that control various body openings and passages inside the body. Fourth is heat production. Your author says that the skeletal muscles produce somewhere up to 85% of the body heat that is generated by the body. Now, that requires a lot of energy spent, a lot of ATP, a lot of blood flow. One more task of our muscle system is glycemic control, regulation of blood glucose. This is a little bit past us right now, but we will talk about it more in the endocrine system. Look now at figure 10.1. This is called connective tissues of a muscle. And this is a muscle that's in the thigh of our leg. You can see the hip joint, or at least the femur part of the hip joint, at the top of figure A. In cross section, you'll see it in figure B, and a photomicrograph in C. In the next chapter, we will look very, very closely at the microscopic portion of muscles and exactly how they contract. But this is more general and some new terms. First, I want you to skip that, back up. Okay, On page 310, this talks about connective tissues and fascicles. Your author makes the statement that a skeletal muscle is more than just muscular tissue. It also contains connective tissue, nerves, and blood vessels, both arteries and veins. The endomysium is a very thin sleeve of loose connective tissue that surrounds each muscle fiber. Look at the sketches in figure 10.1 to show the endomysium. And I want you to learn right now that a muscle fiber is another name for a single muscle cell. Okay? Muscle fiber is the same as a muscle cell that we'll cover in more detail, chapter 11. The perimysium is a thicker connective tissue sheath that wraps muscle fibers together in bundles, which are called fascicles. These fascicles all function together to form to perform one type of movement. The endomysium is a fibrous sheath that surrounds an entire muscle. On its outer surface, this tissue grades into the fascia, and on the inner tissue, it grows between the fascicles to form the perimysium. And finally, the fascia. This is a sheet of connective tissue that separates neighboring muscles or muscle groups from each other and from subcutaneous tissue. Okay, figure 10.2 shows a classification of different muscles according to muscle fascicle orientation. I'm not going to spend a lot of detail on that, but I want you to read through the section there on page 311 for the different types of muscle shapes and fascicles. Now, figure 10.3, and a little bit of text on page 312, shows muscle compartments. A muscle compartment is defined as a group of functionally related muscles that are enclosed and separated from others by connective tissue fascia. A compartment also contains the nerves as well as the blood vessels that supply this muscle group. You will see one particular muscle compartment in figure 10.3 there on the bottom of page 312. This is in the lower leg that shows the two different bodies of the gastrocnemius muscle, also called the calf muscle. Let's talk about muscle attachments. If this muscle, when it contracts, is not attached to anything, obviously nothing will happen. Look at figure 10.4, and there you will see some examples of the biceps and the tricep muscles in the upper arm that connect into and go over the shoulder joint and down into and across the elbow joint. Now, skeletal muscles are attached to bones through different types of connective tissue, and there are two different forms, if you will, of attachment. One is an indirect attachment. This is when a muscle ends very conspicuously short of its bony destination. This gap then is bridged by a fibrous band or sheet called a tendon. And I'm sure you've heard that word, a tendon. If a tendon gets inflamed, we call it tendinitis. Now, one way that I learned it in medical school, it might help you too, is that most of us have heard of the Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon joins the calf muscle into the heel of the foot. And you know that in the back of the ankle joint is an extremely strong connective tissue called the Achilles tendon. This is how I remember that a tendon joins a muscle to a bone. There is another type of muscle attachment, and this is called a direct attachment. And this occurs when both the origin and the insertion of the muscle join directly into a bone at both ends. Okay. There are another couple of terms that you should learn, again from figure 10.4, synergistic and antagonistic muscle pairs. Almost all skeletal muscles exist in pairs. There you will see the, again, the upper arm. I'll have to get a little bit further back so you can see my upper arm here. When I want to flex my elbow, the biceps muscle, biceps means two, there are two heads to the biceps muscle. It contracts, I tell it to contract, and my forearm flexes. Now the muscle itself is done. It is flabby and loose. My arm would be permanently in this position unless there were an antagonistic muscle to the biceps, means to do the opposite movement. The antagonistic or the opposite movement comes from the triceps muscles, three heads that are below the upper arm here. And when these three contract, my forearm extends. So, okay, we have synergistic, antagonistic. In a finger, get it out of your face there. Trying to find, okay, synergistic, antagonistic. One or the other, however you want to define it. They are all in pairs. Let's look now at a small section called muscle origins and muscle insertions. Most muscles join two different bones together. So when they contract, they move one bone while one end of the muscle stays put. The origin of a muscle, let's look again at figure 10.4 there. In the biceps muscle on the far right-hand side of the picture, you see that the origins of the biceps muscle are into the head of the humerus and into the shoulder joint. These do not move, the origin of the muscle. Going further down, you see the bellies of the muscle. The bellies are the middle, thicker part of the muscle. And then finally, at the bottom of figure 10.4, you will see two different insertions. One on the left is the insertion of the triceps muscle. On the right is the insertion of the biceps muscle. And these insertions are both tendons that cross the elbow joint and allow when the muscles contract, to either flex or then to extend this particular muscle. Okay, we talked briefly about intrinsic, maybe I didn't. Here's intrinsic and extrinsic muscles. Another definition. These are in pairs. An intrinsic muscle is entirely contained within a particular region, has both its origin and its insertion there. It doesn't mean to the same bone. It just means in the same general region. The opposite are extrinsic muscles, and these have their origin and their insertion in different parts of the body. Very few muscles are actually intrinsic. There are some in the fingers and in the feet, hands, fingers, and feet, and toes, but most are extrinsic muscles. Briefly, we're going to talk about muscle innervation and then blood supply. Without nerves supplying the muscles, they could not contract. Without blood supply to the muscles would die. Now, there are two general types of nerves, nerves that cause muscles to contract in the body. Most of our body muscles, excuse me again, the voluntary muscles are contracted by spinal nerves. There are 12 different pairs of spinal nerves that come off of the spinal cord. One to the right side and one to the left side. These emerge through intervertebral foramina, small openings, and then innervate the muscles below the neck. We, of course, will study more about this when we cover the chapters on the nervous system. Also, you might not have heard of the cranial nerves. Cranium refers to our head. These 12 pairs of nerves arise from the base of the brain, back here, emerge through skull foramina, various holes in the skull, and they innervate muscles of the head and neck. Okay, blood supply we will talk about later when we talk about the cardiovascular system. Now, folks, the rest of this chapter talks about and shows a complete overview and discussion of every single skeletal muscle in our body. No, as I said, you are not expected to know every single muscle. You will if you go to medical school. You will if you go to physician's assistant, nurse's school, nursing practitioner. If you go to dental school, you will learn more about the muscles of the head and neck, obviously. Figure 10.5 shows the anterior view at two levels of the human body. On page 316, on 317 is the posterior aspect of the body. Again, the muscles closest and just under the skin, closest to the external part of the body. And then on the left-hand side are the deeper skeletal muscles. The remainder of this entire chapter, not to beat a dead horse here, as the saying goes, but this covers every single other muscle in skeletal muscle in the body. If you want to, this book, unfortunately you don't have the book. You would need this textbook if you go on in medical training of any sort, or a lot of different type. If you go on in school to study physiology or anatomy, even more. Did you know you can get a PhD in physiology, for example? Okay, I want you to at least thumb through the rest of this chapter, know how to use the index in the back of the book. Most of these specific muscles are listed in the index just under the general term muscle. Some of them are also listed by their specific name, such as the biceps muscle or the triceps muscle. Okay, this is the end of chapter 10. I will very soon be lecturing on chapter 11, which covers muscle tissue. And this is extremely interesting. This gets to the microscopic level where we learn exactly how a muscle is able to contract and what happens when it does. Thank you for your attention. Hope these have been helping you. Bye-bye.